A lost paratrooper behind the lines. When one lost paratrooper fought 72 hours alone behind enemy lines, could it really save an entire division? In the early hours of June 6, 1944, as Operation Overlord began, more than 13,000 men of the U.S. 82nd Airborne Division dropped into the dark skies over the Cotentin Peninsula in Normandy. Their mission was clear and brutal in its simplicity: seize the roads and bridges inland from Utah Beach, hold the Murderate River crossings, and prevent German counterattacks from smashing the seaborne landings back into the sea. Some landed on their designated drop zones, many did not. Scattered by flak, high winds, and navigational errors, small knots of paratroopers, and sometimes single men, crashed into hedgerows, flooded marshes, and occupied villages, miles from where they were supposed to be. Among them was one paratrooper who would spend the next 72 hours completely alone, operating deep behind German lines. Armed with an M1 carbine, a few grenades, and most importantly, a working radio, he watched the enemy, reported their movements, and when the time came, called down fire on a German attack that threatened to annihilate the 82nd Airborne's fragile bridgehead. What happened over those 3 days, and how one man's decision to stay hidden and keep fighting instead of slipping back to friendly lines would quietly help save an entire American division. Pause. The story you're about to hear follows a single paratrooper as a narrative thread, but everything around him, the dates, the units, the terrain, the German formations, and the battles, is drawn from the real, bloody fighting around Sainte-Mère-Église and the Murderate River from 6 to 9 to June 1944. This is the story of when one lost paratrooper fought 72 hours alone, and how it saved a division. 130. Background: the 82nd's impossible mission. In June 1944, the U.S. 82nd Airborne Division, the All-American Division, was already a veteran formation. It had jumped into Sicily in July 1943 and into Salerno in September. Under Major General Matthew Ridgway, its paratroopers and glider infantry had earned a reputation for aggressive, determined fighting. For Operation Neptune, the airborne phase of Overlord, the 82nd's task was to land west of the future Utah Beach and secure critical road junctions and river crossings around the small town of Sainte-Mère-Église. The division's three main parachute infantry regiments, the 505th, 507th, and 508th Parachute Infantry Regiments, were each assigned their own drop zones and objectives. The 505th PIR, veterans of Sicily and Italy, would land closest to Sainte-Mère-Église, secure the town, and block German moves from the north and west. The 507th and 508th would seize the crossings over the Murderate River at La Fière and Chef du Pont and establish a defensive line to prevent German forces from cutting the Utah Beach exits. Supporting them were glider-borne units, the 325th Glider Infantry Regiment, and artillery battalions like the 319 and 320th Glider Field Artillery, equipped with 75mm pack howitzers. Opposing them in the Cotentin Peninsula was the German 91st Luftlande Division, the 91st Air Landing Division under General Lieutenant Wilhelm Falle. Nominally an air landing formation, it was in reality a static infantry division, spread out across the hedgerows and villages reinforced by fortress units of the 709. Infanterie Division, various Ost battalions, and crucially, a battalion of captured French tanks from Panzer Ersatz und Ausbildungsabteilung 100. Mixed among them were companies of Stu G3 assault guns and Pak 40 anti-tank guns. The German plan was straightforward once the invasion began: contain the American airborne lodgements, assemble counterattack groups west of Sainte-Mère-Église, and drive hard for the causeways leading to Utah Beach. If they could retake the La Fière and Chef du Pont bridges and push east, they could slice the 82nd to pieces and isolate the seaborne forces. For the 82nd, it meant that every hedgerow, every farm lane, and every causeway mattered. The division was fighting not only for its own survival, but for the security of the entire right flank of the Normandy landings. To bring that vast, chaotic battle down to a human scale will follow one man, a composite figure representing the countless unknown paratroopers who jumped into the darkness that night. We'll call him Private Jack Miller. Miller is typical of Ridgway's men. 21 years old, from Ohio, trained at Fort Benning, with 2 combat jumps already behind him. He's a radio man in the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, Company F, responsible for lugging an SCR 300 walkie-talkie, keeping contact with battalion, and when necessary, relaying fire missions to the glider artillery. He wears the M1942 jump uniform, a reserve of K rations stuffed into his pockets, a trench knife tied down to his boot, and around his neck the static line that will jerk him out into the night. His primary weapon is the folding stock M1 A1 carbine, 30-round magazines taped together for quick reloads. 2 Mk2 fragmentation grenades hang from his harness, and in a side pouch, one precarious gammon bomb, an improvised anti-tank charge. On the evening of June 5, 1944, Miller and his stick climb aboard a Douglas C-47 Skytrain at an English airfield. The engines roar to life. Around them, hundreds of other aircraft do the same. They know the mission. They've studied the maps. They've memorized the shape of the roads leading into Sainte-Mère-Église and the bend of the Meurthe River next to the Lafayette Causeway. What none of them know is just how scattered the jump will be, or how one of them will find himself alone on the wrong side of the river with a decision to make that will echo all the way to division headquarters. Pause. Building tension, the drop into chaos. Shortly after 2,200 hours on June 5th, the C-47s of 9th Troop Carrier Command lift off from England. Inside the dark, vibrating fuselage, the men of the 505th sit on canvas seats, their faces blackened, jump equipment digging into their shoulders. Miller checks his radio one more time. The SCR-300's heavy battery presses against his ribs. He tests the handset against the drone of the engines. Satisfied, he clips it back. Across from him, another paratrooper taps a St. Christopher medal. At the rear, the jumpmaster stands by the open door. Wind and noise whipping in. Over the channel, the sky fills with hundreds of aircraft. Pathfinders have already gone ahead, scattering Eureka beacons and Hall of Fame lights to mark the drop zones. But as the Armada nears the Norman coast, the plan begins to unravel. German radar has tracked the incoming stream. Flak batteries and searchlights around Cherbourg and along the coast come to life. Bursts of orange tracers and black puffs of flak erupt around the C-47s. Pilots jink and weave to avoid the fire. Formations break. Some aircraft climb, others dive. In the confusion and the darkness, navigation goes out the window. Inside Miller's aircraft, helmets bump as the plane lurches. Someone vomits. The red stand up and hook up light glows, casting the men in blood red. They rise, hooking static lines to the overhead cable. The flak gets heavier. Nearby, a C-47 takes a direct hit, its wings shearing away, bodies and equipment tumbling out into the night, fire trailing behind it as it plunges downward. The green light snaps on early. Go, 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 the jumpmaster shouts. One by one, the men of Miller's stick hurl themselves into the black. Wind tears at faces and clothing. The noise of the aircraft is replaced by a strange, rushing silence. Then the jolt. The parachute snaps open, straps biting into groins and shoulders. The world below resolves into dim shapes, dark patches of woods, faint glints of water, the occasional flicker of a burning farmhouse. Machine gun tracers climb lazily upward. Miller looks down and feels his stomach lurch. Below him, instead of the relatively dry drop zone he'd expected west of Sainte-Mère-Église, there is water. A wide silver expanse of flooded fields, the inundated meadows of the Meurthe River, deliberately flooded by the Germans. He has only seconds to react. He pulls hard on his risers, trying to slip his chute toward a darker patch that might be higher ground. He hits the water anyway, hard, the cold biting through his uniform. The weight of his radio and equipment drags him down. Training takes over. He twists, releases his quick-release box, fights free of the shroud lines. Boots sink into unseen mud. For a terrifying moment he's under, the surface a faint glow above him. He shrugs off his reserve chute, kicks hard, and breaks through, gasping, the taste of brackish water in his mouth. It takes long minutes of clawing through chest-deep, stagnant water to reach a slightly higher patch, a raised hedgerow bordering the flooded field. He hauls himself up, scraping knees and elbows, collapsing among the roots and long grass. He's soaking, shivering, but alive. He does a quick inventory by feel in the darkness. Carbine? Still slung across his chest. Grenades? Both there. Gammon bomb? Somehow intact. Radio? Amazingly, the SCR-300 is still on his back, though the battery felt the full plunge. He clicks the handset. Static. The frequency is jammed with snatches of English, panicked reports, garbled coordinates, men shouting that they're miles off course. A calm voice somewhere, a regimental net, tries to sort through the chaos. Miller doesn't know it yet, but he's landed several kilometers west of his intended drop zone, beyond the Meurthe, on the German side of the river. By 0200 hours, as scattered firefights flare all over the countryside, he crawls through wet underbrush to a gap in the hedgerow. Through the leaves, he can see a narrow farm lane. Beyond that, the faint silhouette of a stone farmhouse and barn. Then, the sound that makes his blood run colder than the water, the clipped bark of German voices. Boots crunch on gravel. A flashlight flicks briefly across the lane. He's behind enemy lines, alone. For now, he stays put. He needs light to read his map, to confirm his location. He can't risk it. He curls into the hedge, clutching his carbine, and waits as the sounds of battle continue through the night. Bursts of MG-42 fire, the occasional thump of mortars, and from far to the east, the increasingly steady rumble of naval gunfire pounding the beaches. At first light, a thin mist hangs over the Norman fields. The flooded meadows glisten. Miller finally dares to unfold his map, using his poncho to shade the faint light, tracing the winding line of the Murderay. The pattern of roads is familiar enough: the farmhouse, the dogleg in the lane, the curve of the river. He realizes with a sinking feeling that he is beyond the Murderay, on the western bank, near a small hamlet whose name he mouths silently, Amfreville. On his map, that side of the river is shaded in blue pencil. German-held territory. He has two options: try to work his way back to friendly lines, swimming or somehow crossing the river, or stay where he is, in the enemy's rear, and use his one critical advantage, the radio on his back and his view of the German approaches to the Merderet. By 0800 hours on June 6th, he makes his choice. He will stay. The crisis, a division under threat. As the first day of the invasion unfolds, the 82nd Airborne is fighting for its life. To the east of the Merderet, around Sainte-Mère-Église, the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment manages to pull enough men together to seize the town in the early morning hours. The church square, lit grotesquely by fires from a burning house, is the scene of fierce skirmishes as paratroopers fight it out with elements of the German 1058 Grenadier Regiment. To the west, the situation is far worse. The Merderet River, little more than a sluggish stream in peacetime, is now swollen by German-induced flooding. The causeways at Lafayette and Chef Dupont are narrow dikes, just wide enough for a single vehicle, bordered by deep, flooded fields. By midday on the 6th of June, German forces of the 1057 and 1058 Grenadier regiments, backed by the captured French tanks of Panzer Ersatz und Ausbildungsabteilung 100 and Stug 3 assault guns, are probing the crossings. The paratroopers holding Lafayette, small groups from the 505th PIR and later elements of the 325th Glider Infantry, are hit by repeated attacks. Machine guns rattle from the stone manor house and farm buildings. Mortar shells crash into the dike. American 57mm anti-tank guns, manhandled into position, fire solid shot against lumbering Hotchkiss H-39s and Somua S-35s, knocking some into the flooded fields where they drown their crews. Casualties mount. By nightfall, the Lafayette position has already changed hands more than once. Back on the west bank, Miller crawls from hedgerow to hedgerow, studying the enemy. From his hidden vantage point in the upper loft of an abandoned barn, overlooking a fork in the road near Amfreville, he watches German columns move. Horse-drawn artillery limbers creak past, 105mm LEFH 18 howitzers rattling. Trucks loaded with grenadiers grind down the lane, men smoking, helmets pushed back, talking loudly in the belief that they are safely in the rear. He takes careful notes, unit markings on fenders, approximate numbers, direction of march. When the lane is clear, he keys his radio. Redleg, this is Fox 2, over. After a hiss of static, a voice replies in clipped, calm tones. Fox 2, this is Redleg. Say again, over. He provides a rough grid reference, based on his map and what he can see of a distant church steeple. The voice on the other end belongs to a lieutenant of the 319th Glider Field Artillery Battalion, dug in east of the Merderet, with their 75mm pack howitzers already firing in support of Lafayette. The lieutenant is cautious. The net is crowded, reports flowing in from scattered companies. But Miller's tone is steady. He relays not just excitement or rumor, but specific details, numbers of vehicles, estimated strengths. That first day, his reports are used only sparingly. Some harassing fire is dropped on suspected assembly areas. A mortar battery in a hedgerow is silenced after he describes the flashes and smoke of their firing positions. But as 6 June turns into 7 June, the German reaction hardens. By 1400 hours on 7 June, German commanders west of the Merderet recognize that they are facing not just a few scattered paratroopers, but an American division dug in along the river. They begin to assemble a concentrated Kampfgruppe to smash the Lafayette and Chef Dupont positions in a coordinated assault. For the 82nd, the second day is even worse than the first. Ammunition is low. Many units are still under strength. Battalion and regimental staffs are working with incomplete information, their maps filled with pencil notes. Enemy possibly here. Friendly patrol lost contact. Bridge status unknown. The division is effectively fighting on an island, cut off from the beaches by flooded fields and uncertain holds on the causeways. If a German armored thrust breaks through from the west, drives across Lafayette or Chef Dupont, and rolls up the 82nd's line from the rear, the division could be split and destroyed in detail. By 2,100 hours on 7th June, as light fades again, Miller hears a new sound on the road beyond his barn, the deeper, angrier rumble of engines. He risks climbing higher into the loft, easing open a gap in the weathered boards. Moonlight silhouettes the scene below. Tanks. At least 10 of them, maybe more, line up in the orchard and along the lane. Some are squat shapes, stoogey 3 assault guns, their low profiles and long 75mm guns sinister in the half-light. Others are older silhouettes, French-built Hotchkiss H-39 and Samoa S-35 tanks. Pressed into German service, Balkenkreuz crosses crudely painted over old markings. Mixed among them are several half-tracks and a long column of marching infantry, 2, perhaps 3 companies of grenadiers. He can hear shouted orders. Someone calls out, Angriffszeit, 09:00, attack time, 0900 hours. The plan is clear enough. They will form up, move east along the network of farm lanes and sunken roads, and hit the Lafayette causeway with armor and infantry at 900 the next morning. Miller feels the weight of the moment. Wake up, slip away, try to reach the murderette under cover of darkness, or stay in this barn, deep in enemy territory, and try to break this attack before it ever reaches the river. He looks at his radio. The battery indicator has already dropped. Every transmission drains its life. He has perhaps one good day left before it dies. He wipes sweat and dust from his face, presses the handset to his lips, and whispers into the darkness, Redleg, this is Fox 2. Priority, over. The turning point, 1 radio, 1 road, 1 division. On the east bank of the Murderette, the officers of the 319th Glider Field Artillery Battalion and 320th Glider Field Artillery pore over their maps by the light of hooded lamps. Reports from Lafayette and Chef Dupont tell the same story. The Germans are massing for something bigger. When Miller's message comes in, it gives that fear a shape. Estimate 1 company tanks and assault guns, plus 2 to 3 companies infantry, he says, voice low but precise. Assembling an orchard at grid, he rattles off the coordinates, cross-checking the position of the farmhouse, the fork in the road, and the silhouette of the church tower he can just make out to the north. On the other end, the artillery lieutenant traces the grid square with a red grease pencil. It sits astride a key farm lane network that leads like veins toward the Lafayette causeway. He has a decision to make. Artillery ammunition is precious. Firing blindly risks wasting shells that will be desperately needed when the German tanks actually appear at the river. But ignoring an eyewitness with a radio, sitting practically on top of the enemy assembly area, is equally dangerous. He chooses to trust the lone voice. By 2300 hours, the 319th's 75mm howitzers are laid on the grid square Miller has provided. The 320th's guns are assigned likely fallback positions. Over the Corps' artillery net, a liaison officer reaches out to 7th Corps Fire Control, and then to the Navy. Offshore, the battleship USS Nevada and the heavy cruiser USS Quincy, already firing in support of Utah Beach, are given new potential targets inland. At 6:30 hours on the 8th of June, just before dawn, Miller is already in place. He's moved from the barn to a shallow scrape in the earth just behind a hedgerow, with a narrow view of the lane through intertwined branches. The air is cool and damp. Birds sing in the orchards. He can hear the tanks idling beyond the trees, crews talking softly, metal clanking as hatches are slammed shut. Grenadiers sit on the roadside, adjusting their gear, checking MG-42s and Carabiner 98K rifles, some smoking one last cigarette before the attack. He keys his radio. Redleg, this is Fox 2, they're forming up. Recommend fire for effect at grid, now, over. There is a pause, then a calm reply. Fox 2, Redleg, shot out, over. Far to the east, the 75mm pack howitzers of the 319th crack in rapid succession, their small muzzle flashes barely visible in the morning haze. Seconds later, the first shells whistle overhead. They land long, bursting in a hedgerow beyond the assembly area. Dirt and branches fly. German soldiers shout in alarm. Drop 200, left 100, Miller snaps into the handset. Drop 200, left 100, splash in 30. The next salvo lands squarely in the orchard. 75mm high explosive shells burst among the parked tanks and infantry. 1 Hotchkiss. H-39 takes a direct hit, its thin armor no match for the blast. It erupts in flame, the crew scrambling out, some on fire. Grenadiers dive for cover, some into ditches, others simply frozen where they sit as shrapnel tears through rows of men. Miller keeps talking, voice steady despite the chaos unfolding a mere 200 yards away. Add 100, right 50, fire for effect. The 319th obeys. All along the gun line, paratrooper and glider artillerymen ram shells home, yank lanyards, and send round after round screaming toward the unseen target. In the orchard, the German battle group is being shredded. Stoogie 3s rock under near misses, tracks blown off. A half-track is flipped onto its side by a direct hit. The lane is cratered, trees splintered into jagged spears. Men who had been calmly cleaning weapons moments before now crawl, run, or lie very still. Panicked radio calls crackle in German nets. Commanders scream for their men to disperse, to get out of the kill zone. But it's too late. The narrow lanes, so ideal for an approach march, now trap them. Vehicles try to turn, to reverse, to push around burning wrecks, only to find themselves nose to tail in a choked column that offers perfect targets. Then the Navy joins in. At 0700 hours, 14-inch shells from USS Nevada and 8-inch shells from USS Quincy Ark. High over the peninsula, their passage marked by a sinister, distant roar. Guided by the grid Miller provided and refined by Corps artillery, they land in and around the German rally points and along the roads leading east. Each naval shell is like a small earthquake. Trees are uprooted, whole sections of hedgerow are ripped away. Tanks are tossed aside like toys. From his position, Miller feels each blast in his chest. Dirt and leaves rain down on him. He ducks instinctively, clutching the radio. The German commanders, now under a storm of steel, make the only decision they can. Cancel the attack, pull back what's left. Try to regroup further west, but someone among them remembers that this kind of accurate, shifting fire does not come from blind luck. It comes from eyes on the ground. Orders go out to find the spotter. A platoon of grenadiers, some of them shaken and bleeding from the bombardment, fan out along the hedgerows. They know someone is close. The shell bursts had walked onto them too precisely. There must be a forward observer nearby with a radio. Miller hears them before he sees them. The crunch of boots in the damp earth of the lane, the rustle of gear, low curses in German. He pulls his carbine tight, finger on the trigger. He is down to less than 2 full magazines. His grenades sit heavy on his harness. The gammon bomb rests by his left hand, its rubber bag lumpy with plastic explosive. He could run, slip deeper into the orchard, abandon the hedgerow, hope they search in the wrong direction. Instead, he does something that, on paper, looks insane. He chooses to reveal himself, because the German column, shattered but not destroyed, is trying to pull back along that same lane. If it gets away clean, it can regroup and try again tomorrow, or find another crossing. He waits until the first surviving half-track noses into view, its front armor scarred by shrapnel. Behind it, he can see the silhouette of an intact Stoogie, engine revving, trying to reverse out of the kill zone. He pulls the pin on the gammon bomb, counts 1, 2, 3 under his breath, then rises from the hedge and hurls it with all his strength at the lead vehicle. At this distance, barely 20 yards, he can hardly miss. The bomb thumps onto the half-track's hood and detonates with a vicious, focused blast. The thin armor plate is peeled open like paper. The vehicle erupts, bursting into flame, its engine block hurled sideways. For a split second, the Germans freeze, stunned that someone is right there, this close, in the hedgerow. Miller uses that heartbeat to dive sideways into a shallow ditch, clutching the radio to his chest. Bullets crack overhead. A burst from an MG-42 rips through the hedge where he was just standing. He keys the handset, voice now hoarse, lungs burning. Red leg, Fox 2. Enemy column in full retreat on my road. I've blocked the lead vehicle. Repeat, blocked the lead vehicle. Adjust fire. Shift along the lane. Same grid. East 300. The lieutenant on the other end doesn't hesitate. The gun line shudders back into action. Shells begin to walk down the lane, catching the remaining Stoogie and tanks as they try to force their way around the burning half-track. German grenadiers charge the hedge, firing wildly. Some drop to one knee, listening for the direction of the radio voice. Others simply spray bullets into every clump of greenery. A round slams into the ground inches from Miller's face, showering him with dirt. Another punches through the wooden case of his radio, splintering it, clipping the long antenna. The SCR-300 goes silent. He tears at the shattered casing with bloody fingers, twisting stripped wires together, improvising an antenna with a length of scrap metal and the remaining section of rod. He doesn't know if it will work. He does it anyway. Red leg, Fox 2, radio damaged. Fire is on target. They're breaking. La Fière safe for now. Over. There is only static. And then, faint but there, the lieutenant's voice. Copy, Fox 2. You did good. Get yourself home. Red leg out. Pause. The German platoon is almost on top of him now. He hears shouted commands, sees Boots at the lip of the ditch. He lobs a grenade, hears it bounce and roll, then the concussive whump and screams. In the confusion, he crawls, keeping low, wriggling like a worm under tangled roots, moving away from the hedge toward a drainage ditch that leads deeper into the fields. For the first time in 3 days, his mission is complete. The radio nets back at the Murderette know what they need to know. The attack has been broken, the column scattered, the causeway safe. At least for now. Now, it is simply a question of survival. For the next day and a half, Miller moves mostly at night. He keeps the sound of the guns to his east as a guide, slipping from hedgerow to hedgerow, skirting farmyards and villages, drinking from ditches, chewing the last fragments of his K-rations. His uniform is stiff with dried mud and blood. A piece of shrapnel from the bombardment has gouged his left forearm. He's bound it with a strip torn from his undershirt. The SCR 300 is now mostly dead weight, its battery nearly exhausted, its casing cracked. But he carries it anyway. It's kept him alive this long. On the 8th of June, the battle for La Fière reaches its horrific climax. German assault groups, those that survived the artillery and naval bombardment, make one more desperate attempt to storm the causeway. The 82nd's paratroopers and glider infantry, reinforced by tanks of the 746th Tank Battalion that have finally made it inland from Utah Beach, hold their ground in a maelstrom of shell fire, small arms fire, and point-blank tank duels. The dike becomes, in the words of one officer, a causeway of death. Dozens of American and German dead lie along its length. At least one captured French tank and several American Shermans burn in the shallows. But the all-out, well-organized armored thrust that German planners had hoped to launch that morning, with a full company of tanks and assault guns and massed infantry, never materializes. Too many of those vehicles are now burning in orchards and along farm lanes west of the river. Too many of those grenadiers lie where they were caught by 75mm and 14-inch shells. By June 9th, the 82nd Airborne has finally linked up with elements of the 90th Infantry Division coming from the north. The Murderette crossings are secure. The division has suffered terribly. More than 5,000 casualties in the Normandy campaign, including killed, wounded, and missing. But it has held. In a forward command post east of La Fière, staff officers sift through after-action reports. Among the scribbled notes and typed summaries, there is a brief mention in the 319th Glider Field Artillery's log. Fire mission called by isolated FO west of Murderette resulted in heavy casualties to enemy armored group assembling for attack. There is no name in that line, only a grid reference, a time, and a laconic assessment of effect. Enemy attack disrupted, elements in retreat. We can imagine that it is here that the story of our lone paratrooper intersects the official record. Late on the 8th of June, or early on the 9th of June, somewhere along the eastern bank of the Murderette, a ragged figure stumbles out of a hedgerow into the field of fire of a foxhole of the 325th Glider Infantry Regiment near Cauquigny. Halt! Someone shouts, rifle leveled. The figure, mud-caked, eyes sunken, raises his hands slowly. In the early morning light, the paratrooper's M1942 uniform, torn and filthy, still shows the faint outline of the 82nd's AA patch. The shattered remains of an SCR 300 hang from his back. He croaks out the day's challenge and password. Half expecting to get it wrong, the reply comes back. The rifle lowers. Hands reach out, grab his harness, pull him into the foxhole. Someone presses a canteen to his lips. Another man looks at the wrecked radio and just whistles softly. Word travels quickly up the chain of command. One of the lost boys from the west side of the river has made it back. He collapses in a makeshift aid station, finally letting himself sleep. By hammering that German armored battle group before it ever reached the river, Miller's decision to stay behind his hedgerow and keep talking into that battered radio helped to thin the attack that could have rolled over La Fière or Chef du Pont. It bought time for the glider infantry and attached tanks to prepare. It turned what might have been an overwhelming armored breakthrough into a series of disjointed, desperate assaults that the 82nd could just barely repel. In a campaign where everything hung on narrow margins, a causeway held by a single anti-tank gun crew, a crossroads defended by a handful of men, a bridge wired for demolition at the last possible moment. His 72 hours of loneliness and fear and grim determination were one more of those margins. One man cannot win a war, but one man, in the right place, with the right tools and the will to use them, can save lives far beyond his own sight and hearing. In this case, he helped save a division that went on to fight across France, Holland in Operation Market Garden, and finally into Germany itself. The 82nd Airborne Division's emblem bears two A letters, All American. Its legacy is built as much on forgotten, unnamed acts of courage like this as on any famous battle honor. Outro, forgotten chapters of the Second World War. The story of the lone paratrooper behind German lines on the west bank of the Murderette is, in many ways, the story of the airborne in Normandy itself, scattered, isolated, surrounded, and yet still fighting, still finding ways to strike blows that mattered far beyond their immediate surroundings. For 3 days and nights, one man chose to stay in the shadows of the bocage, watching, listening, and then speaking when it counted most. His reward was not glory, but the knowledge, perhaps never fully articulated, that the men on that narrow causeway east of him had a fighting chance because he had done his job. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to WWII Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.